There are few things more embarrassing than being a regime-approved satirist. Led by Donkeys is one such group. There are assortment of Bristolian, craft cider swilling centrist dads who rage on behalf of the machine. And they went to the Unite the Kingdom rally and they put up this billboard. They drove a large LED truck in the middle of the crowds, and like a cuckoo in the nest, first they had Unite the Kingdom and the Union Jack and Stay Hydrated emblazoned on it, and then it gave way to Immigration Makes Britain Brilliant. Now, these platitudes are cost-free for the luxury belief class, like Led by Donkeys, who engage in predictable performative stunts such as calling Liz Truss a leftist or complaining that J.K. Rowling is a bigot at Glastonbury. Meanwhile, they never actually suffer from the benefits of the diversity that they champion. They never hold the government to account when they do corrupt and atrocious things, like trying to block the grooming gang scandal or appoint Peter Mandelson, the US ambassador. Zip, zilch, silence from them on more substantive matters. But okay, let's assess their claim. Considering they want to say immigration, carte blanche, as a category, makes Britain brilliant. Diversity is our strength. What they're trying to do is own every positive aspect of immigration. What they're saying is essentially immigration to Britain, the sum total of it is Ian Wright and Sol Campbell and every successful England striker that we have to wave a flag and clap as part of our patriotic duty. If you own every positive product of immigration, you also own every negative one, because you're saying immigration, undifferentiated, on the whole, makes Britain brilliant. Let's assess their claim. Let's see what we have to trade off in order to have this brilliant immigration that is such a benefit to us. Let's start with our judicial system. You can't have a high-trust society, an individualistic morality, and a judicial system that metes out justice without fair or favour to one given group, and diversity. You have to pick one. Do you remember this incident? Manchester Airport, where two brothers were detained after they got in an altercation with a Kuwaiti passenger who they alleged had verbally abused their mother. Well, the police came over and apprehended the two brothers for the assault, and they immediately began assaulting the police officers. I have to pause here because I can't show the violence on screen. But the CCTV showed this brother here, Mohammed Fahir Amaz, punching the ginger-haired policewoman who we see with a bloodied nose in floods of tears on one of the police body cams that was put out later. The original video was by bystanders filming a police officer kicking Amaz in the head while he was on the ground, and we had this whole Black Lives Matter-esque outpouring of support for these two Pakistani brothers from Rochdale. And then there was a massive protest outside the police station so that the brothers could get released. And you had their lawyer, independent Gaza Muslim candidate at the local elections, the last general election, Ahmed Yaqub, sitting between the two, looking, they were both looking dishevelled in athleisure, looking rather sorry for themselves, not about what they'd done, protesting their innocence. Then this CCTV gets leaked. Currently, there's a police officer on trial for misconduct for leaking the CCTV to vindicate his fellow officers of any wrongdoing. And credit to Reform, by the way. Credit to Richard Tice, who I don't agree with on a whole lot. At the time, he was saying, the police officers were totally right. They were assaulting other police officers. They could have grabbed their weapons. These police officers were armed. They had tasers. They could have committed an act of terrorism. He should have been kicked in the head even harder to make sure he went down. And Reform promised to bring a private prosecution forward because it took 150 days for charges to be brought against the brothers. Now, Mohammed Fahir Amaz, the university dropout, was convicted of violence against the police women. He denied it all throughout the trial. He protested his innocence, despite there being multiple angles of footage showing he committed the assault. But the brothers were both accused of also assaulting another police officer, the man who kicked them in the head. Well, the jury just delivered no clear verdict. They couldn't decide, based on CCTV, whether or not these brothers had assaulted the police officer, despite them being on camera doing it. We're meant to say allegedly. We saw them hit the police officers. They started it because they felt disrespected. They claim to have been disrespected by a Kuwaiti passenger who apparently verbally abused their mother, who they were meeting at the airport. Bear in mind, in no point in this interaction is a British person involved other than the police officers who had to step in to apprehend these violent thugs. And then, because they have no guilt, they, instead of a clannish morality, they care about saving face It's a concept called asabaya in Islam. Asabaya basically means clannish in-group solidarity, confining your moral concern to members of your immediate family, your extended clan, your tribe, and the Ummah, the global Muslim race. There are inconsistent hadiths on whether or not their Prophet Muhammad condemned or endorsed it, but there's certainly other verses in the Quran that says that the bonds of brotherhood between believers do not abolish the blood bonds between believers based on their ethnic group, their tribal affinity. There's also, in the Indian subcontinent, of which Pakistan is a part, even after partition, the concept of izzat, face saving. It's a social currency that is farmed so long as a member of your clan or family doesn't do something wrong that causes them to lose social standing relative to other families. It's an honor-based morality system. And so it encourages you to lie and cheat and steal and not admit fault, otherwise you lose izzat, you lose social standing. And so when these moralities interact with our individualistic justice system, it produces outcomes where, say, as there has been suggested, if there were Pakistanis judging these brothers, then they want to return a non-guilty verdict, even if they should have been found guilty based on the video evidence, because they want to help the brothers save face. They want their community to come away with a spotless reputation, even though it isn't deserved, given the other activities that the Pakistani community have been engaging in our country, and we'll get onto that in a moment. So the details of the case are disclosed here. This is the weeping policewoman. By the way, in instances like this young woman should not have been involved, because she is clearly traumatized. She clearly couldn't handle the violence, and she shouldn't be expected to. She shouldn't have had her nose broken. But because we're dealing with such barbarian savages like these two brothers that think, I've been mildly disrespected, let's start a fight with armed police and then say we were innocent despite everyone seeing that we did it. When you're dealing with these sort of people, you need the toughest men possible. And this is just, unfortunately, no place for a nice woman who means well but was never going to stand a chance against these violent thugs. University dropout Mohammed Fahir Ahmaz and his brother, former KFC assistant manager Mohammed Ahmad, both from Rochdale, yeah, just vital pillars of the community. Absolutely the kind of immigration that makes Britain brilliant, isn't it? Led by donkeys. Both of them were charged with assaulting 3 officers. Last year's trial saw Ahmaz convicted for the violence he meted out to PC Lydia Ward, who had the broken nose and was weeping, and another armed colleague, PC Ellie Cook, who suffered a bruise on her face. While Ahmaz was convicted of causing actual bodily harm to PC Ward and assaulting PC Cook, jurors could not reach verdicts on whether the brothers had both assaulted PC Marsden, despite it being on camera. And the new jury at Liverpool Crown Court once again failed to decide on the case, so the fate of this trial is yet to be determined. It may be retried. We're just going to keep going around on this carousel denying the obvious, because members of the jury are actually members of their peers. And when a tribal, ethnically partisan culture interfaces with our institutions that presume themselves neutral without realizing that neutrality and impartiality are themselves not neutral, you have to value them in order to practice them, then those institutions are unprepared for the ethnic nepotism, the clannishness, the redefinition of justice to mean, as Polemarchus said in Plato's Republic, doing well by one's friends and punishing one's enemies. In this case, advantaging the ethnic in-group and disadvantaging the ethnic out-group. Well, our institutions can't deal with that ethnically partisan definition of justice. They can't deal with that clannish in-group solidarity. And so these violent thugs and their broader community that were willing to intimidate the police in order to secure their release, agitate on their behalf, Ahmaz, who, despite being caught on camera doing the assault, pled not guilty, insisted he'd done nothing wrong, it advantages them. They will get away with it because they can just band together, show no remorse, and with sufficient demographic force, shift things in their favour. By the way, it says PC Marsden could still face charges himself. He remains under investigation by the Independent Office for Police Conduct, which could still refer him back to the Crown Prosecution Service, and another male Greater Manchester police officer, along with PC Marsden, who confronted bystanders filming the brawl, now remains under investigation because he has been accused of leaking the CCTV of the altercation to the Manchester Evening News. So he did the right thing, actually. He vindicated his fellow officers by showing the violent assault that Ammaz and his brother committed, and instead the police officers who put down the violent thugs did all that was necessary in the line of duty in a high-stress scenario. They're the ones being punished by the institutions for doing the right thing because they hold themselves to our standards. But these two brothers, these Pakistani immigrants, they don't hold themselves to our standards, and so we don't hold them to our standards, and instead a jury of their peers enforces their clannish standards, and they, to a degree, are looking like they're going to get away with it. So, casualty of the immigration that apparently makes Britain brilliant, a high-trust society, an individualistic moral system, and jury trials. I don't think that's worth the trade, do you? And we've known this for going on 20 years. This is a report by the Ministry of Justice called Diversity and Fairness in the Jury System, published in 2007, and on page 164 and 165, they publish the findings of a study on the outcomes of jury trials based on the juror and the defendant's ethnicity, and they write, a total of 319 jurors took part in the study, and it was therefore possible to pool all these jurors' votes and to examine whether individual juror votes to convict or acquit the defendant were affected by the ethnicity of the juror or the defendant. Examining juror ethnicity alone revealed only limited differences in juror votes. Black and minority ethnic jurors were slightly more likely to vote to convict the defendant, 41%, than white jurors, 35%. When juror votes were examined in relation to the ethnicity of the defendant, there was some indication that jurors were more likely to vote to acquit the black and minority ethnic defendant, 70%, than the white defendant. However, when juror ethnicity and defendant ethnicity were considered together, more significant differences emerged. As the figure and the table below illustrate, jurors of different ethnic backgrounds reach significantly different verdicts depending on the race of the defendant. Black and minority ethnic defendants, including Pakistanis, were less likely to be found guilty than white defendants, while the white defendant was much more likely to be found guilty by black minority ethnic jurors than white jurors. And this is despite a per capita overrepresentation in crime of black and minority ethnic defendants. And if you look at the chart, it's just stark. To summarise, if you are a black or minority ethnic perpetrator, defendant, and you're being tried by a jury of your ethnic peers, you're more likely to get off. Where if you are a white defendant, and the jury passing the verdict is predominantly black and minority ethnic, you're almost certain to get sentenced. We have an ethnically partisan justice system. This was the case 20 years ago, before mass migration really hit the roof, before the Boris wave, before the small boats crossing crisis, and we were advertised as some sort of brothel to every bored Pashtun in Afghanistan. This was the case over 20 years ago, we knew about it, and yet our politicians, our media, the likes of led by donkeys, continue to insist that importing such people that ethnically gerrymander our jury system, our political system, that commit vast amounts of violent crime, that those people are actually what make Britain brilliant. No, actually, I think our individualistic morality, our manners, our world-class justice system, our parliamentary system, our relative levels of peace and prosperity, all of which are products of the distinct English and British character, are what makes Britain brilliant. It's the British people, their culture, their expectations, their norms, their customs, and their laws. That's what makes Britain brilliant, not incompatible, subversive, violent foreign cultures that have no place here. Did immigration make Henry Nowak's life brilliant? Led by donkeys. Henry Nowak, the exemplary 18-year-old British-Polish ancestry finance student who was studying in Southampton, stabbed to death, allegedly, by Vikram Digwa, a Sikh man who was carrying around a sword, who felt slighted because Nowak asked him if he was a bad man, who seems to have slashed Nowak in the back of the legs as he was running away trying to jump a fence to get away from his attacker, who pierced his lung with an 8cm blade, who then, as the police arrived at the scene, accused Nowak of racism, led him to be cuffed and drowned to death in his own blood, who called his family, whose mother took and concealed the blade away from the crime scene, who pocketed Nowak's phone to try to conceal a recording on Snapchat of the altercation that led up to the event that showed that Nowak wasn't racist to the guy, even if he was, doesn't justify him being stabbed to death or stabbed at all, whose brother and father showed up to the scene and fabricated a story of racial abuse, of his turban being torn off even though he was wearing the turban at the scene of the crime, who, when they sat in the back of the van, tried to speak in another language and admitted to the stabbing and spoke nothing about the alleged racial incident. Did immigration make Henry Nowak's life cut short more brilliant? Did the family's clannish morality, their attempt to save face, to farm Izzat, to use the magic words of Britain's anti-racist justice system against their innocent victim, did that make our country brilliant? As Connie Shaw, who does excellent work for the Free Speech Union, reminds us, the FSU overturned the Turkish Islamic apostate Hamit Yozgan's conviction for burning a Quran because originally the Crown Prosecution Service paper said he had allegedly harassed, quote, the religious institution of Islam. So they were trying to convict him for offending Islam as an entity rather than any individual person. Not that causing offence should be a prosecutable offence in Britain anyway. And then the Crown Prosecution Service tried to overturn his acquittal to find him guilty of blasphemy. And the evidence was that he had caused, quote, harassment, alarm or distress because a Muslim man ran out of the Turkish consulate brandishing a knife and tried to stab him and said, I'm going to kill you. And also a Deliveroo driver cycled up alongside, not knowing what was going on, but saw the burning Quran and kicked Yozgan in the head while he was down out of a sense of clannish, religious, collective solidarity and morality. If you felt disrespected as a member of the collective, then you have a duty to lash out violently and commit this offence. That guy was spared jail time, the guy that tried to stab him, but the CPS tried to do everything to convict Yozgan of offending that man and Islam more broadly. So the judicial system is totally complicit with this clannish morality, by the way. And the only way that I can understand it is, as Ernest Gellner wrote in Nations and Nationalism, the same mentality that people had when they were redistricting the nations of Eastern Europe, displacing various ethnic groups, subjecting them to pogroms and persecution, starvation, sexual violence, genocidal murder. It's because they see this as a necessary transition stage, a growing pain to get to an egalitarian utopia. They have, ahead of time, defined our country as a place for anyone from anywhere. Just by the happenstance and injustice of geography, these people we were all in a cosmic waiting room before we were randomly allotted our parents, and they just so happen to have been, their ancestors, born in Pakistan. So we have to migrate everyone over to more prosperous countries where the scales will fall from their eyes, they'll all become secular, liberal, enlightened, productive, progressive, and there'll be no more violence, no more crime, no more difference, no more division. Division itself is artificial. We're all just blank slates. And so, every preventable, optional, murder, assault, theft, rape, life ruined or ended by men who never needed to be in our country in the first place. Like these brothers. Like the Sikh man who allegedly murdered Henry Nowak. Well, they're just a small price to pay for diversity. Because eventually, we'll all see that immigration has been brilliant for Britain. And I'm not willing to pay that price. I think none of these lives should be ruined. But ideologically, all of our institutions believe we'll get to this egalitarian end destination eventually, and so we just have to sort of put up with the pain in the process. And this is evident in one of the latest examples of a rape gang. This trial disgusted many people because 3 teenage gypsies lured 2 separate girls to remote locations and sexually assaulted them as a gang at knife point and filmed it on Snapchat to create content to share, presumably, with their clan, who see nothing wrong with such behaviour. Because I know, if I had a friend or relative who did this, I would beat them senseless, take the phone and call the police. For some reason, they weren't held to account by their own community, and they were able to circulate these sexual assaults as content. The 2 girls in question have said they want to die. Now, I hope they have loving family members around them to take care of them. But otherwise, they're not going to forget this. Their lives have been in some part ruined. Like their propensity to trust people, to have a normal relationship again, impaired, if not rendered impossible. But the judge in this case, and this is why I brought it up, because our institutions are complicit with this, because they have felt the need to accommodate foreign cultures, clannish, collectivist moralities. Because, again, they believe that immigration makes Britain great, and so any foreign culture, no matter how violent, must be accommodated. The judge, in this case, decided to give them no jail time. They instead were given youth rehabilitation orders instead of jail sentences during their hearing at Southampton Crown Court, because the judge told them, none of you need to go to prison. Judge Nicholas Rowland, name and shame, told the boys, none of you need to go to prison today. He said the boys are very young, have low intelligence, a limited understanding of consent, and were susceptible to peer pressure. Those are all the reasons they should be locked in a box forever until they're adults and then given the death penalty. Because we shouldn't have to deal with these people. They will never be productive, peaceful members of society. They are very likely to reoffend rather than be rehabilitated. I don't think there's anything that they can do to make restitution for these crimes. They show no remorse. They did it again. It was premeditated. They bragged about it. They filmed it. And they don't even seem capable of understanding what they've done wrong. Which means you need to keep them far away from the rest of us. Normal people who abide by the law and want to raise our families in peace. Why should 1%, maybe it's higher than 1% now, given the mass importation of complete psychopaths and sex predators into our country over the last few decades, but why should 1% of the population ruin it for the rest of us? They shouldn't. But for some reason, our judicial system, our politicians, our civil servants, our media, our satirists, like led by donkeys, thinks that this is the key to our success. It's what makes us brilliant. The judge in the case said the boys should be praised for their conduct during the trial, saying, I think of you as very young and none of you have been in any trouble before. You've all done very well with the restrictions put in place throughout the trial. The second boy and the third boy were described as their problems being quite bad. I don't care. There are no mitigating circumstances that make premeditated gang rape and torture okay. And no, they haven't behaved well, because not committing a rape during your trial for rape and not having committed rape before you committed 2 rapes is not evidence of their good behaviour. The rapes themselves are evidence that they are evil, and they should be punished. For some reason, the judge in this case didn't think so. This has been referred to the Attorney General, Lord Hermer, who does everything he can against the interests of the British people, because it is deemed unduly lenient by both Tory and Labour MPs alike. But I won't hold my breath at this actually receiving the sentence it deserves. Even if they do receive a prison sentence, it's going to be light. They don't deserve to ever leave prison again. Otherwise, there's a grave imbalance on our collective moral ledger. Judge Rowland said the first boy had been diagnosed with ADHD and long-standing anxiety, which made him more open to peer pressure. The second boy fell into the bottom 1% in IQ for his age and been diagnosed with ADHD. And the third boy had low intellectual capacity and a limited understanding of consent. Right, they're literally too retarded to be moral. And, sorry, I've been worried about things before. I've been a bit jittery and unable to concentrate on something I'm bored of. Didn't go out and commit premeditated rape and torture, though, did I? Perish the thought. Millions of us manage not to. Those that do deserve to be punished to the furthest possible degree. But because they are an isolated community, because they have a high level of clannish solidarity, because they have a high level of cousin marriage, because they're insular, they are considered a protected class. It seems that anything foreign is worthy of unlimited grace afforded by our institutions, whereas our negative opinions of these foreign communities for their behaviour are considered the problem by our institutions. Because for some reason, it is our stubborn imposition of standards on these people that are considered the last barrier to an egalitarian utopia. It is actually these people that make our country brilliant, not us. They're not the only one this week. Another Pakistani grooming gang has been sentenced to over 300 years in prison, cumulatively, in West Yorkshire. If you look at the mugshots, I mean, one of these is not like the other, but the rest of the offender profiles fit the pattern. The offences mainly took place in Dewsbury and Batley in North Kirklees and involved 3 girls. Batley and Dewsbury, by the way, was where the grammar school was, where the Muslim parents gathered outside as a vigilante mob to intimidate a teacher and his family into hiding for daring to show a cartoon of their Prophet Muhammad in a religious studies lesson about the effects of religious blasphemy laws and their impact on free speech, and discussing how the cartoon of Muhammad caused the Charlie Hebdo massacre. So they proved his point, but none of the parents have been convicted or deported. Instead, that teacher has to live in hiding forever because our institutions want to appease the violent foreign mob rather than the upstanding law-abiding British teacher. One of the girls was just 12 when the offences started in 1995. They ended in 2003. So it's taken 20 years for these to be brought to trial. They were probably offending involving more girls for longer beforehand, and yet, despite this being the predictable consequence of mass migration, we're only finding out about it now, and people like Led by Donkeys are still celebrating immigration as our country's core strength. Let's look at the offenders' names, shall we? It starts with Ibrahim Khalifa. He's 87, was found guilty of 2 offences of rape and jailed for 11 years. Then there's Ansar Mahmoud Qayyim from Dewsbury, given 10 years for 3 rapes and 2 indecent assaults. Sajid Majid from Murfield, jailed for 28 years for 5 counts of rape and 3 offences of indecent assault. Manaf Hussain from Hekmondwike, given 25 years for 6 counts of rape and supplying Class A drugs. Tariq Azam from Dewsbury, given 24 years for 5 counts of rape and 4 offences of indecent assault. Zulfikar Ali from Dewsbury, sentenced to 22 years and 6 months for 4 counts of rape. Aurangzeb Azam, sentenced to 20 years for 10 counts of rape and indecent assault. Shakil Haq, 19 years for 3 counts of rape and an offence of false imprisonment. Rafiq Patel, 18 years for 2 counts of rape. Zahid Ali Novsaka, for 18 years for 2 counts of rape. Mohammed Sheikh, 14 years for 2 counts of rape. Mohammed Yassin, 14 years for rape and 2 indecent assaults. Likat Hussein Hanif, 12 years and 6 months for 2 rapes and supplying Class A drugs. Ibrahim Mananiat, 12 years for 2 counts of rape. Shafiq Siddiqui, 11 years. Mohammed Munir Shafi, 9 years. Mohammed Ishtaq Hussein, 8 years. Abbas Kaji, 7 years. Tasawa Hussein, 3 years. And then traitor Donna Lynn, 3 years for offence of controlling prostitution. So she was basically their drug-addicted madam, who was soliciting the girls and grooming them and feeding them to these men. But most of these predators, the woman aside, never needed to be here. These lives never needed to be ruined. But under the auspices of immigration as a category being good for Britain, our borders being open, producing only good outcomes, because Led by Donkeys certainly hasn't had a campaign about the complicity of the regime in covering up and importing the grooming gangs, these people will keep coming into the country and committing these offences. Robbie Moore MP has been campaigning on the grooming gangs for some time and has written to Bradford District Council to target Bradford and Keighley as an area of interest in the government's limited, statutory-backed, local grooming gang inquiries chaired by Baroness Anne Longfield. They've only named Oldham as the 1 of 3 locations of interest so far. Bradford Council has written back confirming that they will be writing to Anne Longfield saying, please dig in our back garden and find where the institutional bodies are buried. So well done to Robbie Moore. But the reason I raise this is because, yes, there are areas that we know about, like Rochdale, where the Pakistani brothers that attacked Manchester police are from, like Bradford, like the broader West Yorkshire area, like Kirklees, like Rotherham, Telford. But this is a nationwide problem, and it's not just Pakistanis. It's been Somalians in Bristol, and as Dame Louise Casey warned in her 2025 audit that prompted these local inquiries, which I think are just going to be another cover-up, see my recent video on why. She said now men are travelling over as illegal migrants in small boats and forming their own grooming gangs based on religion and ethnic solidarity. And this is happening in other areas. There's been 55 that have been mapped as afflicted across our country, but even areas that haven't been sufficiently enriched by the brilliance of immigration yet, including Norfolk. Norfolk is still largely white British. That's where Great Yarmouth is. And yet, 7 Afghans have formed a Norfolk grooming gang, all after breaking into the country on the back of a lorry or in a small boat. And they've now all been charged with rape and child sex offences. Charlie Peters reported this for GB News. These offences occurred allegedly, we have to say, between August 2023 and May 2025. There are 40 charges who relate to victims in their early to mid-teens at the time. All 7 men charged have an immigration status of refugee and Afghan nationals. None of them actually live in Norfolk or in asylum hotels in Norfolk, but they've been living here 4 years at our expense, and so they've repaid our kindness, giving them hotels and food and clothes and spending money and phones and new contracts by abusing our children, because they see us as fools to be taken advantage of. And it's interesting, none of the offences actually occurred in asylum hotels, but when the Daily Mail looked at just a third of asylum hotels, they found over 400 offences were linked to them. And it turns out, if you apply 0 criteria on who can come into the country, and you actually proactively select the sort of men coming into the country as those willing to pay a people smuggler and launder money via the Islamic Hawala finance system in illicit businesses like dodgy vape shops and phone shops and Turkish barbers in our country, then it turns out you get a bunch of criminals. And these are the alleged criminals in question. Let's read their profiles, shall we? Ahmadin Ahmadzai, 20, lives in Norwich, is an Afghan, has been charged with 9 counts of rape, 2 counts of conspiracy to rape, 1 count to facilitate human trafficking, 1 count of perverting the course of justice, entered the country concealed on a lorry on the 24th of June 2020. Jamil Khalili lives in Dumbarton in Scotland. He's an Afghan and is charged with 7 counts of rape, 1 count of conspiracy to rape, 1 count to facilitate human trafficking, entered the country via small boat on the 23rd of March 2021. Fazal Oryakel lives in Norwich, is an Afghan, is charged with 1 count of rape, entered the country via small boat on the 26th of February 2022. Kai Keika lives in Norwich, is an Afghan, charged with 4 counts of rape, 1 count of conspiracy to rape, and 1 count of facilitating human trafficking, entered the country via small boat on the 4th of September 2022. Mohammed Farouk Shinwari lives in Norwich, is an Afghan, is charged with 2 counts of rape, entered the country via small boat on the 28th of May 2021. Ali Ahmad lives in Norwich, is an Afghan, is charged with 1 count of rape, 3 counts to facilitate human trafficking, entered the country clandestinely via Portsmouth Ferry Port on the 4th of May 2021. And Saeed Wahid Davodzai lives in Norwich, is an Afghan, charged with 4 counts of rape, 1 count of conspiracy to rape, entered the country via small boat on the 9th of October 2022. They have formed these clans in our country based on ethnic solidarity and shared religion, and a shared interest in predation on children. This is endemic to their culture. Do you know how we know this? Well, there's this chap, Afsar Safi, who himself, again, Afghan illegal migrant, kidnapped a 7-year-old girl, took her and abused her in the asylum hotel, and his defense at trial, after his asylum application was rejected, and he's currently appealing the decision, so he's abused a child, had his asylum claim rejected, is still in the country because he's appealing the decision despite the abuse. He spoke through a Pashto interpreter during the proceedings and said, "I like children and she was a child. I asked her where she was going. She said she was waiting for her mother to go shopping. I kissed her to the face. I kissed her out of love for children. Back home, all the people do that." I believe them. We know this. Why we let them in the country? Why did Boris Johnson's government take out a super injunction to prevent the public from knowing they were smuggling under cover of night thousands of Afghans, including Taliban fighters, drug dealers, mercenaries, murderers, like Safi Dawood, who stabbed Wayne Broadhurst out walking his dog in broad daylight? Why did the Johnson government take out a super injunction to cover that up? Why did Robert Jenrick call it a national project and knew it was going on and didn't use parliamentary privilege to speak out about it? Why are these people in our country? Because they truly believe that immigration makes Britain brilliant. They believe that men like this, Afsar Safi, who kidnapped a 7-year-old girl, is the diversity that constitutes our strength. And again, it's not like we don't know that child abuse isn't part of Afghan culture. This is the culture of Bakabazi. So my grandparents, God rest them, used to spend a lot of time in Egypt. They rented a flat out there. They used to go horse riding in the desert and walk around with their friends who were archaeologists. And they came back with tales of their adventures, but they also came back with some horror stories. They spoke to some men out there who said when they were younger, some of their friends were taken off into the cornfields by older men for practice. And that's because in these cultures, young boys are groomed and used by older men to gratify themselves because women are for marriage and children. And young girls are commodities to be bartered and traded between clans and families for resources, for social standing, and are married off to their relatives. And we know all this because the BBC has reported on it sympathetically in the last week. Selling children to survive, Afghan fathers forced to make impossible choices. Notice the sympathetic framing here. 45-year-old Afghan man says, "I'm too old to work, so I just have to sell my children as sex slaves to my relatives." Sick and twisted. Now again, given the endemic nature of child abuse in this culture, I don't think this man's relationship with his daughters are going to be quite so wholesome. And I don't think that a better fate awaits them by being sold. But the BBC, for some reason, think they can not only report on this sympathetically, but they also think that somehow, if you import a man like him, or a man like Safi Dawood, or a man like Afsar Safi, suddenly, when their feet hit British soil, they'll stop doing this. No, instead, they'll do it to your kids. If they're willing to do this to their own children, what are they willing to do to yours? The BBC reports this as if, "Oh, quick, they're crying, open the borders. I'm willing to sell my daughters," Abdul Rashid Amzimi weeps. "I'm poor, in debt, and helpless. I come home from work with parched lips, hungry, thirsty, distressed, and confused. My children come to me saying, 'Baba, give us some bread.' But what can I give? Where is the work? If I sell one daughter, I could feed the rest of my children for at least 4 years." He hugs Rahila, his daughter, kissing her as he cries. "It breaks my heart, but it's the only way. Quick, import all these people so they'll do this to our kids too." Sorry, I've got kids on the way, right? If they are starving, if they are crying, I will do anything, including laying down my own life first, to make sure they're provided for. I will not sell them as slaves. These people would. And so you don't think like them. You don't understand them. You will never understand them. You cannot live alongside them. Their behaviour is utterly predictable, because if you look at their country, this is how they behave when left to their own devices, and they won't behave differently if they're here. There should not be a single Afghan in our country. There is no such thing as an Afghan refugee, especially a male one. As Pagliacci the Hated's famous tweet goes, "What are you fleeing? Oppressing women? You shouldn't be here. We should have nothing to do with that part of the world. The fact they have been separated for us for centuries by oceans is a blessing. Nothing good comes out of Afghanistan. It's called the graveyard of empires for a reason, and it will be our graveyard as a civilization if we bring them into our country." And the reason is not just because of a cultural thing. It's not just Islam. It's not just this is how they treat their children because they like it. This is baked in. This is inseparable from them, because Afghanistan has one of the highest levels of lead poisoning of any country in the world. Lead poisoning lowers your IQ, it lowers your impulse control, it makes you more volatile and violent and unpredictable. And Afghanistan, as you can see by this map, is one of the most lead-poisoned locations in the world. The average blood lead level of Afghanistan is 14.2. And researchers in Washington State in 2022 were screening imported aluminium and stainless steel cooking pots and simulated the cooking and storage of food from Afghanistan. They found that every single piece of aluminium cookware donated by Afghan refugee families exceeded the US Food and Drug Administration's limit for the maximum lead intake from food. The worst offenders were the Kazans, one of which leached sufficient lead to exceed the childhood limit by 650-fold. These people have been one-shot by lead poisoning, by Islam, by Clanish solidarity, by centuries of inter-tribal warfare. Violence is their way of life. And, not just by child abuse, but by rampant cousin marriage. Here's a study from 2012. During the American occupation of Afghanistan, during the supposedly secular government of Afghanistan that cooperated with American forces, but I've spoken to Afghan veterans and they said Bakabazi was going on there, there was rampant child abuse, and soldiers were just told to turn a blind eye, because that's what they do over there. That same mentality is currently governing our institutions over here, by the way. Just turn a blind eye to your own children being abused, because we can't expect better of them, right? The proportion of consanguineous cousin marriages in Afghanistan was 46.2 back in 2012, ranging from 38.2 in Kabul to 51.2 in Bamyan. Don't you think that might be even higher now that a doctrinaire Islamic regime like the Taliban have taken over, because they think the Prophet Muhammad is the most perfect man, and he married his cousin Zainab. He also married a child, Aisha. I don't care about Muslims trying to say, oh, that hadith isn't authoritative. Certainly Muslim countries with a lower age of consent and rampant levels of child marriage think that that's authoritative. They're acting on it. And if they believe it, I believe them. Why should we import anyone from a country that is poisoned by lead, has low IQs, has low impulse control, ravaged by violence, sells their own children into slavery, marries children, and marries their cousins? Because, for some reason, Led by Donkeys thinks immigration makes Britain brilliant. More Afghans makes Britain brilliant, according to Led by Donkeys. And they haven't said otherwise. None of their campaigns have tried to hold the previous Conservative or current Labour government to account on the fact they've imported so many Afghan sex offenders and murderers. We know Afghans are disproportionately overrepresented in sex attacks. None of those attacks need to happen. None of those men need to be in the country. Where's Led by Donkeys' billboard saying denaturalise and deport to keep our women and girls safe? Where's Led by Donkeys' billboard saying restore our individual, independent, accountable judicial system so that the thugs from Manchester Airport are tried for violence against police officers? Nowhere. Instead, they say, oh, immigration means we've got a good England football team. Pay no attention to the rapes and murders that have been committed. Cowardly. Disgusting. You own every last crime that is committed by someone who never needed to be here, just as if you want to own all of the supposed benefits of diversity that do not outweigh all those lives ruined. And so this should just sell home how we don't understand these people. This is Milad Panshiri. Sorry, but I shouldn't be pronouncing these names. Also, I already recorded this video once. It's really hot, the subject material is really angry, and so I'm sorry for my raised voice, but you'll have to excuse me. He entered a Tesco in Bradford with a 6-inch knife, stormed through the aisle, smashed up wine bottles, because of course alcohol is haram, stabbed at merchandise and waved the blade at staff, threatening them. During the attack, he was heard shouting, "I'm mad at King Charles." King Charles has been so Islam-friendly that people are joking he's going to have a Muslim funeral. Now, let's be charitable and say he's just interested in fostering interfaith dialogue, despite speaking more about Ramadan than he did about Easter, because he didn't release an Easter message and using his Christmas message to glaze Jews and Muslims. I don't think this guy is interested in interfaith dialogue because he can't be reasoned with. Because he is so insane. Insane by our own standards. The words don't quite fit it. We think he's mentally ill. This is what his representative at trial, conspicuously named Fawd al-Shad. You're not representing your own ethnic interests, are you, Fawd? He said mental health issues were an exacerbating factor in Panjshiri's rampage, and he said to the court, there's no evidence to suggest he attempted to attack a member of the public. No, he just had a knife for no reason, right? Just all for show. But we use the word mental or insane or deranged or delusional just because we can't understand the nothing that is going on behind these eyes. Look at his gormless face. Centuries of cousin marriage and tribal warfare and ethnic nepotism and violence, slavery, lead poisoning now. These people are so distant from us. They will never integrate. They will never reproduce our civilization, even if they practice their faith and culture peacefully. No good can come of this. This guy, by the way, only got 18 months in prison for carrying a bladed article and destroying property. He should be denaturalized and deported. I think that should be a hangable offense, actually. There's nothing good that he can contribute to our civilization. And yet, led by donkeys, they look at this man. They look at Henry Nowak's killer. They look at the Pakistani grooming gangs. They look at the gypsy grooming gangs. They look at the Manchester airport thugs. And they say, this is the exact kind of immigration that makes Britain brilliant. I don't think trading the safety of our children, our peace and our prosperity, our justice system, our political system, our high-trust society, our culture, the default assumption that we can walk around without being randomly stabbed by some volatile foreigner whose thoughts are unfathomable to us. I don't think any of those things are worth trading for the curry or the football team. Do you?